In the vast, intricate tapestry of pre-contact California, a land teeming with hundreds of distinct cultures and languages, some peoples lived in sprawling territories, their influence felt for miles. Others occupied a world defined by a single, vital artery. This is the story of such a people, the Chimariko. Their entire nation was etched into a narrow 20-mile stretch of the Trinity River Canyon in what is now Trinity County, northwestern California. With small, scattered settlements on the nearby South Fork and New Rivers, their world was this canyon, its sharp inclines, its seasonal rhythms, its sacred places. Archaeological and linguistic evidence suggest they were perhaps the earliest residents of this specific region, a people whose roots ran deeper into this soil than any other. The river was their lifeblood, but it was a demanding partner. Too small, rough, and fast-flowing for the elegant redwood canoes used by their coastal neighbors, the Trinity dictated a different way of life. The Chimariko did not build canoes. They crossed their river by swimming its currents or navigating it on simple, functional rafts. This single detail speaks to a profound truth. Their culture was not just located on this land. It was a direct, specialized adaptation to it. For millennia, this hyper-specialization was their strength, allowing them to thrive in an environment others might find impassable. But this deep reliance on a single, isolated ecosystem also harbored a critical vulnerability, a fragility that would prove fatal when their world was invaded. Their existence was sustained by the river's most precious gift, the great seasonal runs of salmon. Salmon, along with eels, formed the core of their diet and the foundation of their society. The men were responsible for fishing and hunting, using a variety of techniques, nets, traps, harpoons, and spears, to harvest the river's bounty. They supplemented this with deer, elk, and bear from the surrounding forests, while women gathered acorns, their main vegetable staple. The Chimariko were a small nation, never numbering more than a few hundred people at their peak. Their society was organized into several village communities, the largest of which was Sudamdaji, at a site now known as Burnt Ranch. Each village had a chief, and a person's social standing was determined by wealth and birth, a cultural trait they shared with their powerful neighbors, the Hupa. Yet, in this social structure, there was a key distinction. Unlike the Hupa, the Chimariko do not appear to have practiced slavery, suggesting a more egalitarian, if less prosperous, society. Their material world reflected this reality. Their homes, called awa, housed 2 or more families and were built in the same fundamental style as those of the Hupa, but were simpler, constructed with fir bark instead of split planks. Their basketry was similar, but they lacked the elaborate, specialized crafts of their wealthier neighbors, the carved spoons, stone-handled adzes, and wooden trunks that signified the prosperity of the downstream tribes. They were, in the words of one ethnographer, like a poor man imitating the habits of his more prosperous neighbor. This was a culture of pragmatism and survival, shaped by the constraints of their small population and rugged territory. Their spiritual life was rich, though distinct from their neighbors. They practiced 4 main ceremonies: a doctor-making ritual, a girl's puberty ceremony, a sweat dance, and an annual summer dance. Their creation story centered not in a human-like creator, but in Dog, the most powerful being, who foretold a great flood. When the waters came, only a few survived. From a bone fragment found by the lone surviving man, a woman was created, and from their union, the Chimariko people were born. The Chimariko Canyon was not a world unto itself. It was a small, precarious space nestled between larger, more powerful groups. Upstream, to the east, were the Wintu, with whom the Chimariko maintained good relations. They traded, importing valuable red and black obsidian, and even adopted the Wintu manner of playing the guessing game, a popular form of entertainment and gambling. But downstream, to the west, lay the territory of their traditional enemies, the Hupa. The Hupa were a southern Athabascan people, culturally and linguistically distinct, and by all accounts more numerous, wealthy, and powerful than the Chimariko. This geopolitical reality placed the Chimariko in a constant state of tension. There is considerable evidence to suggest that even before the first white settlers arrived, the Chimariko were a people in decline, their population shrinking under pressure from their formidable Hupa rivals. The cataclysm that was to come did not strike a nation at the height of its power. It was a final, overwhelming blow to a people who were already fighting for their existence. Perhaps the most profound testament to their unique identity was the language they spoke. Chimariko was a language isolate, a tongue with no proven living relatives. While some linguists in the early 20th century, like the famed Edward Sapir, grouped it into a hypothetical Hokan superfamily, most specialists today agree that its connections to other languages are undemonstrated. It appears to be its own ancient family, a branch on the tree of human language that evolved in the isolation of the Trinity Canyon. To lose a language is to lose a library of human thought, a unique way of seeing and describing the universe. To lose a language isolate is like losing an entire phylum in the animal kingdom. It is the irreversible silencing of a voice that has no echo. For millennia, this singular language was spoken in the half-dozen hamlets along the river, a testament to a history separate from their Athabascan and Penutian neighbors. It was the sound of their culture, their mythology, their identity. Soon, it would become the sound of silence. For the Chimariko, the outside world first arrived not with a bang, but a whisper. In the 1820s, non-native fur trappers entered their territory, the first alien faces to appear in their canyon. But this initial encounter was fleeting. The trappers moved on, and their passing left the tribe largely unaffected. For another generation, life continued as it had for centuries. This period of false calm, a quiet before the deluge, only serves to sharpen the horror of what came next. The people who were coming next did not see the world as the Chimariko did. For the indigenous peoples of California, the land was sacred. It was not a thing to be owned, but a living entity that provided sustenance. Their role was one of stewardship, of managing the land's abundant resources respectfully to preserve them for the future. The arriving Americans carried a profoundly different worldview, an ideology that had propelled them across a continent: manifest destiny. This was the belief that their expansion was not only justifiable, but divinely ordained. In this view, the land was a commodity, a wilderness to be tamed and made profitable. Its resources, timber, water, and minerals were there to be taken. The native people who had called this land home for millennia were seen not as sovereign nations, but as an impediment to progress, a savage obstacle in the path of civilization. This was not a simple misunderstanding. It was a fundamental, irreconcilable collision of philosophies, a chasm of perception so wide that peaceful coexistence was almost impossible. In January 1848, hundreds of miles south of Chimariko territory, a carpenter named James Marshall found shimmering flakes of gold in the American River at a place called Sutter's Mill. The timing was explosive. Just days later, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed, officially ceding California from Mexico to the United States. The news of gold electrified the world. It triggered one of the largest and most frantic mass migrations in human history. The abstract ideology of manifest destiny now had a tangible, irresistible engine: the promise of instant wealth. The belief in an inevitable expansion was about to be made real by a tidal wave of humanity, a force of such speed and magnitude that it would compress what might have been a century of colonization into a single, brutal decade. This global frenzy, born of a chance discovery in a distant river, was now on a collision course with the small, isolated world of the Chimariko. The 1850s brought the deluge. The Chimariko's isolated canyon, which had once been their fortress, now became their trap. The very geology that had shaped their lives also held traces of gold, and the miners, the 49ers, came in a flood. Imagine the scene. A stable, ancient community of perhaps 250 people, suddenly and completely overrun. They were inundated by thousands of aggressive, armed men from every corner of the globe, all consumed by a single-minded obsession. The scale of the invasion was impossible to comprehend. In 1848, the non-native population of California was a few thousand. By 1852, it was well over 200,000. For the Chimariko, this wasn't an encounter, it was an occupation. The miners brought with them a new kind of warfare, ecological devastation. Their methods, particularly hydraulic mining, were brutally effective at extracting gold and catastrophically destructive to the environment. Entire hillsides were blasted away with high-pressure water cannons, washing millions of tons of gravel, silt, and toxic mercury into the river systems. For the Trinity River, and for the Chimariko, this was a death sentence. The mining debris choked the river, destroying the salmon spawning grounds and annihilating the fish populations. This was not an unfortunate side effect of progress. It was the deliberate destruction of the entire foundation of Chimariko society. Their primary food source, the resource upon which their entire culture was built, was being systematically wiped out before their eyes. This act of ecocide was the first and most effective weapon of genocide. It pushed the Chimariko to the brink of starvation, creating a state of desperation that made conflict inevitable. When the Chimariko fought back, as any people would when faced with the starvation of their children, their resistance was used by the miners and settlers as justification for their physical extermination. The 1860s became a decade of bitter conflict. The historical record is sparse on the details of every skirmish and massacre, but the outcome is stated with chilling consistency. The fighting led to the near annihilation and almost total extinction of the entire Chimariko population. This was not a war between equals. It was a campaign of extermination waged by a technologically superior and numerically overwhelming force against a small, starving people defending their home. The few who survived were scattered and broken. They fled their ancestral canyon, the only home they had ever known, and sought refuge wherever they could find it. In a final, desperate irony, many of the survivors fled downstream into the territory of the Hupa, their lifelong enemies. The existential threat posed by the white invaders was so absolute that it erased generations of indigenous rivalry. The choice was simple: face certain death at the hands of the miners, or seek mercy from an old foe. This desperate flight underscores the totality of the catastrophe that had befallen them. The end of a people is not an abstract event. It is the story of individuals, of last breaths and fading memories. By the turn of the 20th century, the Chimariko had been reduced to a handful of survivors, their nation a ghost in its own canyon. The great ethnographer Alfred Kroeber, documenting the tribes of California, wrote of the Chimariko in 1906 with a stark and brutal finality. There remained a toothless old woman and a crazy old man. This poignant, almost cruel description puts a human face on the end of an era. We now know these individuals were likely a woman named Polly Dyer and a man known as Dr. Tom. Another ethnographer, Roland B. Dixon, managed to find them in 1906 in a desperate attempt to record what he could of their culture. Mrs. Dyer, despite her age and frailty, became his primary source, a final flickering repository of Chimariko knowledge. And Dr. Tom, described as half-crazy, proved worthless for purposes of investigation. In these two figures, we see the last embers of a nation, one still able to share the light of her memory, the other lost to the trauma of its extinguishing. As the Chimariko people vanished, a second parallel extinction was occurring, the death of their language. A small group of pioneering linguists and ethnographers engaged in a frantic race against time to document this unique voice before it was silenced forever. Stephen Powers collected the first word list in 1875. He was followed by Jeremiah Curtin, Roland Dixon, and Edward Sapir, who all made vital contributions. But the most extensive work was done by the obsessive and brilliant John Peabody Harrington. In the 1920s, Harrington found Sally Noble, a woman of Tsunungwe and Chimariko heritage, who was then considered the last fluent speaker of the language. He worked with her tirelessly, filling notebooks with the grammar, vocabulary, and stories of a dying tongue. The final words were recorded from Martha Ziegler. When she passed away in the 1950s, the Chimariko language, a vessel of human thought that had existed for thousands of years, became officially extinct. The work of these linguists was a form of cultural rescue. They could not save the people, but they could save a blueprint of their consciousness, an echo of their world preserved in ink on paper. The notes and recordings they left behind are now the only testament to how the Chimariko people saw, understood, and spoke of their universe. To say the Chimariko are extinct is both true and incomplete. The Chimariko tribe, as a distinct, sovereign, political, and cultural entity, is gone. It was destroyed. But the story does not end there. The bloodline, the heritage, and the memory persist in the lives of their descendants, challenging our very definition of extinction. The survivors of the 1860s did not simply vanish. They sought refuge, married into and raised families within the Hupa, Shasta, and other neighboring tribes. Their lineage was carried forward, woven into the fabric of other native communities. The 2010 U.S. Census recorded 60 people who claimed Chimariko ancestry, a testament to a legacy that refuses to be completely erased. While the tribe is gone, the people in this sense are not. Their survival required a transformation, an absorption into the very communities that were once their rivals, a testament to the complex and multifaceted nature of cultural endurance.